Welcome to the Savage Worlds Jam podcast. I'm your host, Jared Savage Daddy Gunning. If you want to follow us on social media, we're at SWGM Podcast on Facebook and Twitter. Drop by the YouTube channel, youtube.com/Savage Worlds GM Podcast. If you like what we do and want to get behind it, go throw us a buck on Patreon, patreon.com/SWGM Podcast. And last but certainly not least, on iTunes by the same moniker as YouTube, Savage Worlds GM Podcast. Subscribe, download the podcast today. If you're watching the live stream, we do bring in chat participation from that. So feel free to answer any questions, share an opinion. We do bring that into the show. Tonight's topic, waiting for SWADE. There's a lot of discussion about what we should talk about, and the new rules and SWADE handle that. We should do this. Oh yeah, but SWADE covers that. Oh yeah, but this, that, and the other. So we're going to do this a free-for-all discussion about general Savage Worlds and role-playing, etiquette, not etiquette, rules, discussions, help. So here to discuss it, Dave, the rules maven, Scott.
Wait. So there's things about Savage Worlds we can talk about that aren't in the book we can't talk about, right?
Exactly. And Dustin, the Savage Zealot Smith, and everybody give Dustin a big happy birthday.
Level up has been reached.
Achievement unlocked.
Advance to next stage.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so this is a free-for-all. We're obviously going to bring in anything that the chat wants to bring in and discuss that. But in the meantime, anything weighing heavily on the host mind while we get that started?
I mean, I do believe that Dustin and Gallagher had a question for the podcast.
I do remember that briefly.
So Gallagher wanted to discuss base building. For those of you who are wondering, Gallagher is my horse, and therefore he wants to make sure there is a stable included. All right, so I don't know if you guys know this, but I've been cheating on you with another YouTube channel. The other day I was watching Taking 20, and they were talking about base building. And one of the things that was brought up is that, narratively speaking, all the bases should have a caretaker of some kind. Someone like Alfred for the Bat Cave, or Creature for the Black House, or Alpha 5 for where the Power Rangers live. And I thought he made a really good point there. I thought the idea of having a benevolent NPC that lives there was something that would really work out pretty well for most GMs and for most players.
Well, I mean, all the examples you've given so far are basically fall into like the supers category. And Savage Worlds has 3 or 4 different settings with separate base building mechanics. We've got the one in the Superpowers Companion, I believe, is also available in Necessary Evil 2. Broken Earth, I believe, has one. I know Rippers has a headquarters mechanic, which isn't really the same thing, but it kind of is. And I think
World of the Dead. World of the Dead.
So there's several different settings that do this in different ways. And I'll restrain my own personal opinion until a little later in the discussion, so I don't just immediately poo-poo this. But I think that each one of those gives you a different bent on it. You don't have to just go with there's an all-powerful, benevolent leader that's telling the players where to go and what to do, or the all-powerful, benevolent helper character that's always there to rescue them and drag them back to the Bat Cave so they can lick their wounds.
I mean, the superpowers companion does it at such a way where you spend HQ points based on how many people in your group and at what level they're at or what rank they're at. And it does stuff like it just gives you bonuses. I mean, when you look at most of the base building mechanics in Savage Worlds, they circle around giving you bonuses to investigation rolls, researching, or this one, there's a network in Rippers. It's the Cabal has networks of lodges that you can tap arcane knowledge and libraries through while you're doing research and things of that nature. I don't know how I feel about it one way or the other. I like the idea. I understand the idea that players want something extra in their game that comes from it, but I'll let Dave. I'm pretty much in the Dave camp. About 80-20. I'm still hopeful. I'm still holding out on my own for this could work, but I'll let Dave go ahead and just destroy the concept of why you really shouldn't bother.
Well,
and
again, I don't want to just jump all over this topic and beat it with a hammer until it bleeds and cries for submission in the corner, because I know Dustin really did want to bring it up and talk about it. So I don't want to just immediately poo-poo it. But let's be blunt. At the end of the day, the base for your superhero team, the shelter that your zombie survival group takes residence in, the headquarters for your Rippers crew, all of these things really represent the exact same thing that the X-Wing represents to Luke, or the pirate ship represents to the crew of pirates, or the Millennium Falcon represents, or the Enterprise represents. It is a narrative location or a narrative device that gets you from location to location, that allows the adventure to happen. And in the case of a base, instead of it being a transit device, though in many cases you've got like the boom tubes in the Hall of Justice that let you go all over the place through teleportation from the Hall of Justice, the location ends up being a repository of all their knowledge, all their loot, all their stuff that is just stored on their character sheet, and we never charge them encumbrance for, and we never make them identify why it is they have an encyclopedic knowledge at a D12 of some topic. You know, when the players say they want to research something, we don't question where they go to research it. We narratively talk about where they go to. And if that's the library, or it's, you know, the secret ritual chamber in the Batcave, doesn't matter. It's just a narrative location where something is happening for the story. It literally does not need to be on their character sheet. And here's the other part. As soon as a GM, you can threaten something and take it away, it violates the agency of the player who spent experience on it.
Okay, so is it possible to create a narrative base? If you think about it, there's always that trope of you're in a tavern, everybody has their favorite bar, or you have those players that they want to invest in something like a hub for the city that they're in. Is it possible that if we can't go the mechanical base route, we go the narrative base route?
So, well, hold on. Before we get into the narrative side of that, I just want to touch on what you just said. If players want their character to invest in the local bar or the team base, their characters have this thing called money or supplies that they gather, if we're talking about War of the Dead, or, you know, karma, or whatever it is that they've built up, the goodwill of the people as superheroes. They have this resource they can spend in game that lets them get all kinds of things like laser pistols and time-traveling DeLoreans and, you know, buckets and buckets of winches to spend time with between sinking other people's ships. These things are what the players are having their characters invest in. And if they choose to invest their resources in a location, that's great. Let them do that, because if it's an in-game resource that the character can gain and then it gets taken away, that's no different than a player character who fails a roll and drops their sword off the edge of the cliff. Yeah, it kind of sucks, but they can replace that easily. It's not the same as the player character who fails a dice roll and drops their edge off the cliff and goes, well, wait a minute, I don't have marksman anymore because I failed a dice roll. You know, something you spend an entire advance on is different. And that's really where, for me, this has a complete breakdown. Now, why the mechanical side versus the narrative and what you can do with the narrative? It's really easy to handle a narrative base. The players want to build a base. Okay, let's run an adventure where they get the supplies. Let's run an adventure where they scout the location. Maybe even run a mini adventure where they build the base while doing something else. If you want to include, a dramatic task or a, social conflict where they have to get a certain number of successes versus the opposition in that time period to build it up fast enough. If you've got the classic one from War of the Dead is like you've got the zombie horde approaching and you have to build the defenses before the zombies get there. So you have the zombies making maybe an agility or a run die roll every round to see how close they're getting. And that's their successes opposed by the players making repair rolls and common knowledge rolls and whatnot to build the location. And whoever has more has an advantage in the inevitable base defense that you're going to run later on. So I think that you run into this thing where it's narratively really easy to go, and the players have the Starship Enterprise. And at the last time they were in Stardock, they had this new device installed because as the GM, I want to run an adventure that has the new device malfunction in a spectacular way and shoot them halfway across the galaxy into parts unknown. And I don't have to somehow explain how the device got installed in their base that can only be improved through their advances.
Well, and this is the other thing too with the whole thing that I think Dave is keying in on. Locations, bases, the Bat Cave, if it's the Millennium Falcon, if it's a spaceship, if it's the prison in Walking Dead or the farm in The Walking Dead, it doesn't matter. That's all so much trappings and set dressing. Your base, let's call it your base. Do you really want to invest time and all this effort into resource management? Are you playing a role-playing game or are you playing Landlord, the RPG? I mean, or you're a developer of the RPG. Then, you start to think about, well, wait a minute. What about supply and upkeep? What about disease breaking out? What about the bad guy finding your base? What about them, the Klingon warbirds who are blowing the living shit out of the Enterprise and boarding it? All of that is dramatic narrative story device and almost everything else, except we want to try to bring this mechanical, mathematical approach to, a base is a character and it has these stats and it does this or it gains experience this way. When at the end of the day, it's shelter. And it's either shelter or it's a plot device for what's going to happen next.
You want to give stats to your base? Have the players invest an X amount of currency to upgrade it to the next toughness. You've got, object hardness is in the book as a stat. If the players want to upgrade from wood to stone, that has a certain cost. They want to upgrade from steel to adamantium. It has a certain cost, and their characters have to generate that wealth or resource and then spend it so that they have it in their location that they're going to defend for whatever reason. Again, stop and think about this. What do they use the base for? In Rippers, the base is the fallback location. It's where they're going to do a lot of their research and their rituals. It's where they're going to go to do the Ripper tech investigations and things like that. You don't need them to invest in that for the characters to, you guys are now veteran. The lodge itself is granting you these resources. Anything more? Well, let's run an adventure where you go up to the lodge master and run a social conflict where you're negotiating, trying to get access to the forbidden ritual room that you don't have the rank to enter yet. Because here's the thing. The rest of the lodge exists beyond the player characters. They're not the only Rippers. So, that's where some of this starts to fall apart. The other side of this is, and Jared, you touched on the whole resource aspect and whether or not we want to do resource management. Dan Riley asks, what if the edge that the character had was a signature weapon? Well, the difference is resources are lost permanently when they're lost. They can be regained through play, in that the GM can offer you the ability to climb down the mountain to go get it, or the ability to go into the next town and buy a new one, or to slay the next dragon and get another one. That can be regained in that manner, but it's a permanent loss. When you spend the money at the bar for the ale, you're never going to get that money back. You're going to get more money, you're not that money. With the Edge, specifically for like trademark weapon, there's rules in there for what happens when your trademark weapon is lost. It says this is how long it takes to replace it, just like there is for sidekick, just like there is for followers. All of those edges that can be quote-unquote lost in some way all have a kind of a recursive application where after a certain amount of time they get that back. If your players have invested in a base and you want Cobra to come in and burn it to the ground because it just makes sense for your story that the Joes have lost everything, their base has been destroyed, and now they have to go into hiding and fight this guerrilla war against Cobra that is now the government. If they've put edges into that, now you have to narratively explain how they get a covert version of the base to replace the one that you took away from them.
Plus, if it's an edge that you spent advance points on, it should auto regenerate.
Yeah, you don't have the option to put them in a position where they never have that benefit any longer. Once a player takes a benefit for their character, through advances, that benefit is theirs. It doesn't matter if it's an additional die type in shooting or an additional edge that makes them better at something. That's for that character to use the rest of the campaign. About the only way to lose that would be if the player somehow gains a hindrance through typically injuries. And injuries, unless you're playing with gritty damage, are very uncommon in Savage Worlds.
Yep. You almost have to die in order for it to happen, right? In most cases, if you're playing standard non-setting rules. I mean, and here's the point what we're saying with this, and what I think Dave and I are both saying is, why bother? It's a narrative storytelling device at the end of the day. I mean, if they have a base, if the player characters want to go, we have this space. We go, great. You have all this space to store your gear with no encumbrance. Great. You have this thing that, you have access to star navigation maps and computer databases on your ship. Great. Add a +1 to your investigation roll. I mean, at the end of the day, it's just as simple as doing that. I think what Savages are trying to do a lot of times is kind of recreate the base or the kingdom mechanics from Pathfinder. A great example of, we're in this medieval age where you should be, going out and conquering and collecting gold and creating a keep and eventually becoming your own king in your own kingdom. That's great. When it comes to an episode of Star Trek, the whole idea that the Klingons destroy the Enterprise practically, cripple it is dramatic. The whole point of that is, okay, now we've put the characters out of the frying pan and into the freaking fire. Let's see you get across the neutral zone in a crippled Federation ship. Good luck. Let's see how that turns out. And then next episode, it's made whole again. And here we are. It's the Enterprise. We overcame that adventure. It's been made whole.
Well, and let's take that a step further. Even if you went with some route where they're always going to get the thing back, the reason you still don't want them investing their advancement points in this is because maybe when they get it back, it's not the same one. Yeah. So again, let's use the Enterprise as an example. They have the Enterprise D that has all these bells and whistles. And then when it blows up at the end of the game or the beginning of the next game, they get the Enterprise E, which is the next iteration of the Enterprise, and has all different bells and whistles, comes with all different restrictions and vows, and they owe this thing to them, and they owe their service, and it has to go a specific place. Like, when you stop and think about it, Kirk or Picard or whoever you choose to be the captain doesn't have any fucking control. They're told, we're Starfleet, go there. That works great in a TV show, a movie, a novel. It doesn't work great when that's your player characters and now the GM goes, "We're Starfleet, go there." Ask your players whether or not that's going to fly.
I don't know, though. I mean, that really can seem like it almost builds the concept that you work for someone for the right to use these supplies. I mean, there are a lot of settings that we have where the entire game is built around the idea of trading your time and your skills as an adventurer for either room and board or for some kind of boon or position. But no, Jared, like you said, it does kind of seem like the whole kingdom build aspect, and I'd never really looked at it that way. But one of the things that I am hearing you guys say a lot is that the resource mechanic is money.
Well, and to a certain extent, I mean, stop and think about this for a moment. If we back everything up and we just say, okay, players spend experience to buy benefit. They get a base. The base comes with followers. It comes with shelter. It comes with auto supplies that give them bonuses to specific skill rolls, so on and so forth. You have this iterative list of what the base provides. And then the narrative is required for the story to move forward to take that away. So now the players have lost the benefit of that. You know at some point they have to get it back. So the players don't even take it serious when it's taken away. The player character who bought trademark weapon knows he's going to get it back. They don't need to worry about whether or not they have lost their trademark weapon. Oh, damn, Excalibur fell under a boulder. I guess I'll just get another one in a week. That has no punch. Arthur literally sacrifices his honor to get Excalibur back in at least 3 different tellings of the tale because he did something that violated that blade and had to do some redemption. That has an emotional punch that character is suffering to have that special thing. If instead it's, oh, we lost Camelot, but we'll get another one next week.
Okay. Well, that goes on the idea, though. A lot of times it has to do with the idea of holding on to a space. And Camelot is an iconic base.
Well, let me ask you this. How many times, and I'm not a comic fanboy by any stretch of the imagination, so I'll leave this to the experts. How many times has the Batcave been infiltrated?
Hundreds.
Wait, I thought it's a secret base that nobody can penetrate.
It is.
Right, but here's a problem. The story demands that the base be infiltrated. Therefore, the base is infiltrated.
But of note, he never loses the Batcave.
Right.
So again, this works in that narrative structure. And if you want to go down this path, Savage Worlds has rules for it. I hate them. I think they're bad GM techniques. I think you're better off making it a narrative thing that as the GM, you can add when it's appropriate, take away when it's not appropriate, where the players have a carrot to chase. I don't want something that mechanically is added to the game. But that's me. If it works for you, fucking rock out with your cock out. It's in the book, and it's there because 4 different versions of it were made up in the heads of other designers. They're not bad. They just don't work for me.
Okay.
All right, we have another topic we want to talk about.
So, Dustin, you had brought up another topic in the green room a little bit, and we haven't really gotten much in topic suggestions from the audience other than them disagreeing with me rather vociferously. So what I'm going to point this one to you, where you're saying perhaps we need to have a discussion about when narrative trumps dice rolls and why, sometimes you need to use narrative over a mechanic.
Right. And that, for the people who weren't in the green room, came up because we were actually discussing the possibility of base building. And I made the comment of I've seen people that have to go through 5 different splat books looking for some obscure rule because they just can't think outside of the box. And Jared, I know in previous podcasts you used the phrase plot appropriate distance.
Mm-hmm.
Which has kind of been funny because I've used it in some of my games and had the person just stare at me blankly. How far away is plot appropriate?
Well, and I used that because that was used on me by a GM as a player when I asked, hey, this dinosaur with the super long neck, how far away is it? And he just, without blinking an eye, went, it's plot appropriate distance. Tell me what you're trying to do. Well, I want to throw a Molotov cocktail in its open mouth. All right, give me a roll -1 for distance. And the approach was, he's not so many hexes away. This isn't a tactical combat. What are you trying to accomplish narratively? And we'll frame it under that, guys, what you're trying to do narratively.
Right.
So I think a great example of this is something that I ran into headlong when I ran ETU for the first time. I had a player roll up I believe it was a gay offensive linesman for the ETU football team was his character, and he was dealing with being gay in Texas, and he wanted to run a game. He wanted me to run a storyline for him where the character wins a football game, possibly, and then during the celebration, has to confront people who are hurling slurs at him. So as I'm trying to construct this in my head for how I'm going to do this, I'm thinking to myself, well, I need a mechanic for the football game. And I literally spent 3 weeks trying to create and sending out to all my design friends within the Savage Worlds community ideas. And finally, I think it was Ed himself who just went, so just say that it's a football game. Maybe make him make a single dice roll for throwing or something to determine how athletic he is during the game and move the frick on, because the game's not the point of what you're trying to accomplish. The game is just this narrative backdrop to get to the social conflict and the drama that's coming later. I had gotten so locked in that I had to have a mechanic that I didn't see the fact the mechanic had no impact on the narrative. The narrative was what happens when the character faces racial or sexual slurs versus the idea of whether or not he can mechanically win the football game.
Yeah, I mean, you could have just GM fiat and said, oh, you just won the big game. You threw the winning pass in the big game.
I'm going to say that might have been a good time to use the quick encounter rules if you had to have a mechanic.
Well,
quick combat, I meant.
I'm going to say you go 100% narrative in that situation, because if the player is coming to you as the GM and going, hey, I want to explore this about my character.
Mm-hmm.
That only happens if he wins the football game.
So
if you want to make that happen, you just declare you won the football game.
I just want to point something out.
I don't need a mechanic to determine whether or not he does or doesn't. I just declare it.
Having lived in the Midwest for some amount of time, if you win enough football games, nobody cares who you're sleeping with.
To a certain extent, but that was the direction the player wanted to take the game, and I wanted to facilitate that, but I just like a pit bull with their jaws are on a bone. I couldn't let go of this idea. I had to have a mechanic for the football game.
So let me ask you this, Dan.
I rewritten mass battles. I rewrote social conflicts. I really went on a deep dive trying to recreate a football game as a Savage Worlds mechanic.
So let me ask you this question in that headspace, Dave. If Ed and the guys at ETU, when they put it together, had put in, and here's how you run a football game mechanic, would you have run the football game mechanic the way it was written?
More than likely, I would have run it. And then when it didn't, facilitate the game, I would have made a review note that was a spot where they had fallen short, and I would have naturally come to that conclusion by using a superfluous extra mechanic that wasn't necessary, and then noticing that that's what it was in play. Because as soon as it wasn't mine, as soon as I wasn't personally involved in the creation of it, I'd have that ability to take that step back and go, wait a minute, this doesn't fucking need to be here.
I think a lot of times GMs forget that GM fiat is just as much a part of the rules as dramatic task in Savage Worlds. There's chapter and verse and paragraph assigned to GM fiat, and it's for situations like this, not to screw the players over per se and say, you're all dead, you don't get a roll, as much as it is to go, yeah, this just happens.
Well, and I think there's also just the idea that Savage Worlds is very much built on this idea. The GM interprets the dice roll. You could literally have the entire football game be one dice roll, all the quick combats or the upcoming quick encounters, which I believe they just dropped to the preview for in the last update. So you can handle a lot of that stuff with a single dice roll and wrap it in enough narrative that it feels functional and like an entertaining part of the game, and not worry about whether or not there was a mechanical leg under it or not.
Right.
Things don't need a special mechanic to make them work and be fun at the table. What makes them fun at the table is enough narrative before it that they're invested into whatever mechanic you're using. It doesn't matter if it's a social conflict, a dramatic task, a single dice roll, a combat. That only has punch. Regardless of which mechanic you're using, it only has punch if the narrative before it made it something that players care about.
I agree. To me, narrative and mechanical crunch are a Reese's peanut butter cup. They're chocolate and peanut butter together, and they're awesome. Separate, they're still not bad, but they're not as good as they are together. I think a lot of things too is I think a lot of people just, Jib, a former host on the show, hasn't been on in a while. Coined, well known for saying, "We roll the dice when the GM and the players disagree." That's the only time you need a dice roller or mechanic. Hey, you just won the football game. If nobody at your table shouts bullshit, there's no need for a mechanic or a dice roll. We just all agree you won the football game.
And to be fair, you could play any role-playing game, Savage Worlds, D&D, any of them, with a simple mechanic of a coin toss.
Yeah, all you need is a randomizer.
Yeah, it doesn't matter what the randomizer is. The act of randomizing it, whether it's a skill roll, whether it's a dramatic task, whether it's a social conflict, all has the ultimate same outcome on your story as grabbing a quarter, flipping it in the air, and having the player call it before it hits the ground. Because the randomizer, all it does is give you something random. That's all it's there for. It doesn't actually make the game better at all.
Yep.
It's what we've termed on the show before, a whole lot of disturbation.
Yeah.
Yep. I can see that being the case.
So I will say, there is one exception in the world of RPGs to what I'm talking about, and it is quite simply the game named Dread. If you've never played it, you should take a look. I know the folks from
Evil Hat.
Evil Hat have done it. I know that what was it? Wesley Crusher, Will Wheaton's show,
Tabletop
did it, where they played it, and it was a two-parter. But the idea is it's a horror game based around a Jenga tower. Every time a player tries to do anything in game, they have to play Jenga. And they have to remove the block and replace it. And the tension of whether or not you as a person are good at Jenga replaces some of the tension necessary from the narrative. It's the only game out there I've seen that it has a mechanic that actually impacts how the players feel at the table. as opposed to just the narrative having that punch. And it's interesting to watch someone go through a simple, can I get the car started in a non-tense situation, but they become ultra tense because they're not good at playing Jenga and they have to reach up to the tower and remove a block.
That sounds like a rough game to play sauced. I'm just gonna throw that out there. Or in one of the, or you know what? If you have people, like if you have like friends or family members that are heavy walkers, you know how they're like 4 feet tall, but they're always crushing ants.
Oh, I'm notorious for I slap things. When I laugh really bad, I'll start slapping the desk in front of me. That would be horrible. Someone tells a great joke at the table, and I slap the table, and the Jenga tower falls the fuck over.
Right. Or you definitely don't play that game if you have house pets that are cats.
Yeah.
Oh yeah. No, it's over.
One cat, that game's over.
Guys, I'm
random act of God, I guess.
I'm just glad they chose Jenga and not Twister, because there's no way I'm doing that.
So, I guess the other thing I would want to talk about tonight, in regards to, if we're just going to talk about random stuff, is from what we're seeing with the Kickstarter and everything, and moving forward in SWADE. I know what I'm looking forward to play first, but what are you guys looking forward to with like the different stuff they've showed us? And obviously, we have a little bit of an inside look because we've got the whole licensee access to things. And so we've seen some rules that other people haven't. What game are you the most excited to play once it's out and you can play with it fully?
I know this is going to sound so odd, but I'm really looking forward to the mini settings. Tesla Rangers, Spirit of 1876, yeah, and Kingdom of Aslan and all that, and Abysmal. They look like those sound really interesting to me. Like, I really do kind of like the short $5 books that get put out that don't have too much detail, you know, because they just have a world, like a sandbox to play in. Because like I feel like Savage Worlds is really front loaded as much as it needs to be. Like, you have the deluxe had enough. SWADE really does have a lot of good stuff in it. Like, there's more stuff, and thanks to all of the support from the Kickstarter, we're going to have so much more. And then you have the companions that add whatever you'd be missing. They just throw it in there. So yeah, I'm looking forward to like the mini settings. They seem quirky and fun.
How about you?
I'm a little concerned with talking too closely about SWADE itself, and not crossing the line into, you know, any kind of NDA violations or anything like that. But I agree, Dustin. There's enough little additions to this that are exciting in and of themselves that are just going to be amazingly front-loaded. With that said, I think, honestly, as sad as it is, I know what the first thing I'm going to play with it is, and that's because of design concerns. I think what I'm looking forward to playing the most is a modern setting, something, you know, maybe a modern military shooter or something of that nature, kind of a Tom Clancy-esque spies and super soldiers, you know, doing fighting terrorism, or, you know, going after, you know, the rogues gallery of the world. I think that would be a very interesting thing, because as much as combat has always been the primary focus, SWADE really is kind of gearing up to deliver more on like the face characters, the tech characters, those non, you know, weapon wielding characters being really far more useful and having a lot more that they can do. And that just seems really cool to me and really interesting, and something I want to play with, especially once you add in things like the quick encounters, where I can have all the players tell a great story and then have one person make a single dice roll and move the whole thing forward.
Yeah,
I'd have to say that because of the highly amplified cinematic nature of SWADE, that being the design focus, is meant to be a lot more cinematic in play and gameplay. I want to play something pulp in the new setting. I'd like to see, for example, maybe Ravaged Earth by Reality Blurs. The idea that it's pulp, 1940s-ish pulp, the Shadow and big damn heroes that are a little bit altered by Martian invasion that took place during the Civil War. I'd like to play that. It's kind of like Indiana Jones on steroids as far as the setting goes. I'd like to see that played with the new rules adapted to SWADE.
So
I want to play something pulpy and over the top.
Funny enough that you say that, right as Mason Emerson said in chat, how do we think it's going to cover backward compatibility? He's hoping that SWADE will work with the pulp rules for Daring Tales of Adventure. Unfortunately, I'm going to kind of quash the conversation a little bit and go, guys, be very careful that you don't talk about this too much because we don't want to violate the NDA. But I will say this, Mason, don't worry. The guys at PEG, and the gals, the whole group there, they know what the butter zone is for the player base they have. They're not going to do anything that makes it so you can't play a pulp game in Savage Worlds. I think that the changes I've seen and that they've shown off show that they haven't jeopardized the integrity of the genre neutral aspect of it. I don't think that it's dialed more to pulp than it ever was, but I don't think it's lost any of that either.
Yeah, the foundation is still strong. The house is not going to fall down. That foundation is rock solid. But there's once again, without getting too far into the field of oopsie, I released something. I don't want to go too far into it, but I think that the new rules really would really conform well to even a backward compatible pulp. You could probably pick up Eye of Colquado and play that mini campaign with the new SWADE rules, and it would work. So I'm interested in seeing things like the cinematic combat, things like that. It's kind of the stuff that you've seen. I'll give you a great example. Flash Gordon is got a little bit of SWADE in it that they released already as part of a setting for those setting rules. So things like wound caps and cinematic combat that exists in Flash Gordon. That's the kind of stuff that I'm looking to see play out in a pulp adventure.
Yeah, I feel like Flash Gordon was sort of the beginning of it all. Like they released the setting before they released the core book. But hopefully anybody that's worried about backwards compatibility, hopefully the fact that they did that puts your mind at ease and lets you know that it's not going to be a big deal. It is possible and not too far of a stretch.
Well, and we talked about this when we had Clint on, so I don't feel any remorse in saying this or any hesitancy in saying this. The core rules of Savage Worlds haven't changed.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, if anything else, the new edition just streamlines things that they learned about play over 15 years of like, hey, here's watching actual people play the actual game and some assumptions that we made and thought we were clear on, and maybe not so much. So if more than anything else, the game has been streamlined to still fit the Fast, Furious, Fun moniker.
Yeah, I think the easiest thing to say is the book is better written than it's ever been before, rather than, it's a lot of micro changes, but they're not rule changes. It's a lot of, like, they've cleaned up the language. They provide a lot more examples, things like that. And I don't think that's anything that is not something that Clinton and them are trying to express in what they've talked about. I think that they realize that they have a massive errata section on the forums and a massive errata document that's built up over the years, and they had to release deluxe with errata in it from the previous edition, and now they're releasing the new edition with errata, with some of the deluxe errata kind of pre-baked in. But now I think they've really taken another stab at writing that book where they're not going to need nearly as much errata. I think the errata we're going to see in the future is going to be subject to oh, they learned a new thing and the rule is changing, rather than, oh, look, the wording was bad in the old book and the rule need to be further clarified.
All right.
Now, interestingly enough, one thing I will say that seems really cool to me is the fact that, and I'm going to say this both from the perspective of having seen some of the new stuff as well as what Clint said on the show last time, is Superpowers Companion and Sci-Fi Companion are already dialed in for what's coming. So if you're worried about having some setting or something that you want to play and it not working, if it's only about as old as the Superpowers or Sci-Fi Companion, you're probably good. Anything beyond that, you're probably going to need to make some tweaks. But even that, like, I could see playing Pirates of the Spanish Main in this and not having to make a lot of changes.
Yeah. I mean, well, you're going to run into this. There's going to be setting specific rules with any specific setting. So, but it should, I don't think that should present a problem for you once you read the new edition, of adapting that very quickly and easily. I don't think it's going to be a problem. It is really built to be backward compatible. They're not changing a lot of the core rules that I can see. And so, quick question: anybody want to have a quick discussion about the third iteration of chase rules released from Pinnacle while we're still in Kickstarter mode?
Oh,
do we want to have that conversation?
Do we want to lose our license?
I love you, Chase Rules.
Look, it is no joke. Something Shane has said himself. Chase rules are hard. Like, they have beat their head against this, and they're not the only ones. Every company out there tries to, push really heavily to get a solid version of that going forward. I personally preferred the version that was very initially shown with a few tweaks. The first version of Sleepy Hollow that came out to the public, I liked that version of it. I think it needed a couple of small changes to make it really work effectively. But then I'm way more theater of the mind than a lot of other players are. And I think that kind of walked that line, but leaned more theater of the mind. I think players wanted something more crunchy. I've always felt that the demand from the community is for the chase rules to basically be a vehicular combat system. When there is a vehicular combat system in the book, even in Deluxe, there was a copy that had a full set of vehicular combat rules. And unfortunately, there was this constant conversation about, just use chase for a dogfight, which meant immediately that all vehicular combats were going to be run with a chase. And that just, a chase should be used when there's a chase scene and no other time. I don't like the idea of it being a one-size-fits-all mechanic.
Right. Well, I'll say this. The fact that we're in a Kickstarter and we have a third release of a rule says to me that Pinnacle is very, very adamant about getting it right. And they're very open. Shane's incredibly open to feedback on it as well, and willing to play test certain aspects and they're trying to perfect it. They're trying to make it work for everybody. And I appreciate that from the company. I really do. To see that it's like, oh my God, really? A third iteration? Okay. But that it speaks volumes to what PEG is currently trying to do with SWADE. And they're trying to make it give you the best possible rule set they possibly can, even to the fact where Shane is willing to go back to the drawing board, not once, but twice, and go, okay, we've play tested this. Let's see how this works. We need more feedback. Are we on the right track? So it's not this dogmatic, this is Savage Worlds. You will buy it. You will love it. End of story.
Well, and I think the other thing to remember is the changes that have been made to chases came as a direct result of the feedback the company received from you guys when they released that. That was not the licensees all hated it or something. The licensees had access to it before it was released publicly in Sleepy Hollow, and it had been talked about some, but like the actual major rewrites happened because the fans got the copy of it, gave their feedback, and Peg went, well, the fans aren't happy, give them another version, something that works more to what they want. So again, I think people are constantly concerned that it's going to fall short somehow of what the Savage community wants. And I think it's an unnecessary worry.
Okay, so I'm gonna field this question from Ruben, and we're not gonna take the NDA bait, so to speak, but he says, from what's been revealed thus far about rule changes, what excites the podcast host the most about the new edition of SWADE? I think this is a good place to end the conversation on this as well. It's one of the things that I questioned Clint about when we had him on the show. For me personally, I'm really excited about the complete eradication of charisma. I'm a fan of that idea. I can see Dustin going, no, but I like the idea that if you're going to get these kind of social edges, you're purchasing them as edges, and we're taking out this all-encompassing, all-enveloping mechanic that just sort of lays like a blanket across everything. And it's more specialized now if you want to try to specialize.
Removing the social I win button.
Yep.
It's not an I win button, guys. I would normally play the charismatic face character, and even like I don't know if you guys have watched it, but Kurt Weigel just released an actual video where he covered some of this and he talked about it, and I'm in Kurt's camp on this one. I am actually a fan of charisma. Now, some of the changes that are happening, I can see the sort of overarching change and I can accept it. And they've given you some tools to work with around it. And I'm sort of like, in my mind, I feel like the change had to happen so that other aspects like the test are going to be moving on through. So I like charisma and I like playing face characters, but I'm going to bite the bullet and say, okay, there is more that can be done. And there's a lot of things that I've tried to do in the past that I couldn't, but now I think I'd be able to.
Let me backtrack this a little bit, because I think you feel the same way about the charisma changes I initially felt about the changes to Shaken.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna say this. Those who've followed the podcast for a while know that when they first announced, oh no, we're changing the way Shaken works, I basically had an aneurysm. I'll say this: under the new edition, the new rules of Shaken make perfect sense with the different status effects that you can have that aren't just Shaken. That there's other things you can do in the game that give you those tactical bonuses for tactical play that you would normally get from just the base Shaken rule. So,
wait, you mean like bound and entangled,
distracted,
and vulnerable?
Vulnerable, yeah. Now that those changes are in place, I'm in line with the Shaken rule being, on a success you unshake. I'm fine with that. I think that it's gonna take Dustin a little time to come around on the charisma thing.
It is. I'm gonna have to wrap my head around it, but I think I'll be able to.
Here's kind of where I end up landing on the whole charisma question, and maybe it's just a unique perspective. Is it was too big. Like a lot of stuff in Savage Worlds is wide. Like I take fighting and it covers capoeira, it covers swinging a sword, it covers fighting with a lightsaber. It even covers slamming a helicopter into a giant as a melee attack. But at the end of the day, charisma said, okay, we're going to take a lot of skills that are already doing that. Persuasion and streetwise and intimidation and taunt. And we're going to give a across the board benefit to all of them from one edge. This one edge gives a bonus to all of it. And oh, by the way, it stacks. So now I can take this other edge that gives me another +2, and this other thing that gives me another +2, and then I can put on a jacket that gives me +1, and then I can, put on the right tattoo and have another +1, and you could quite literally stack up a a +8, a +9, a +10 with this to every social skill. When if I'm really attractive, that does me fuck all good in trying to convince you that I'm a mean, intimidating son of a bitch. You know, missing an eye with a scar that shows that I've like had my face ripped off and I'm still here is way more intimidating than me standing there with pristine good looks. A dastardly reputation is also way more intimidating, but it certainly wouldn't help with trying to talk you into doing what I want you to do through persuasion. Because if I got a dastardly reputation, you know you can't trust me. That's kind of the point of a dastardly reputation. So charisma broke itself constantly with this self-contradicting kind of a mechanic. But at the end of the day, I think we can all assume that Peg knows that, and what's coming fixes all the places that we think are going to be broken without charisma being there. Because let's be fair, just like Jared was saying with the shaken thing, removing charisma breaks the way the current game works. So we have to assume that SWADE is built to absorb that break and change it and make it work properly. Now, if I had to pick something that's been revealed that I can talk about that is super exciting to me, it's quick encounters. Because when I saw quick combats and hated them, it's because they were delivered as a way to put attrition into Savage Worlds. It completely broke the way I run the game to add this mechanic that just lets me hand out extra wounds and fatigue to my players before they get to an important moment. But quick encounters is really just really good GM technique boiled down into a mechanic to give to people who maybe haven't learned over 30 years of GMing how to be a better GM and to pitch blah, 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 bunch of narrative. Okay, give me a persuasion check. Blah, 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 20 minutes of narrative as the result of that persuasion check. That's the way your game should run, guys. You shouldn't have a lot of dice rolls. You should only have dice rolls when they're important, and then you should move right back into the narrative layer. And I think Quick Encounters is going to distill that down and give GMs who didn't understand that before a mechanic they can sink their teeth into that kind of gives them the permission to be a good GM.
Okay, so Dustin, with what's been released, what are released on or announced as part of the Kickstarter are you excited about?
Out of like the changes in mechanics?
Yeah, whatever they've announced. So we're not revealing anything. It's NDA.
Oh, wow.
Problem,
Okay.
but what they've already announced is like they've announced quick encounters. They've announced changes to chase rules.
Right.
No charisma.
The no charisma thing, I think everybody knows, sort of bothers me.
Is there anything you're particularly excited about that looks interesting to you to play?
That you're allowed to talk about?
That I'm allowed to talk about is the hard part. I really, just speaking as a longtime fan and actually living the dream of being able to put this stuff together and get an advanced copy, I do appreciate it. And it is pretty awesome to be able to say that you get a chance to see it. I guess what I'm excited about is what we did talk about, the martial arts companion, right?
Yes, Shane talked about that one publicly.
We touched on it.
We watched Clint's blood pressure rise right here on the show when we brought it up. Yeah. So
I'm going to go ahead and say that I am excited to know that they are expanding in that aspect.
They're adding another facet to the companion series.
They're adding another facet to the companion series, and I think on that show I said that because I don't know if anybody knows this or not, but I'm actually kind of a fan of Savage Riffs, and the whole concept of being able to make some kind of mystical kung fu badass just sort of appeals to me. And go ahead and get your bingo cards ready, but I sort of feel like creating warrior monk space wizards with laser swords might also be a fun idea in the future.
So in the realm of, super appreciative that we got the advanced copy, I just want to say, is it horrible that I've had that book now for however long it's been that they've granted that to us? I still haven't read the whole thing because I've been so heads down working on making sure that our products are compatible with it. I've only read the parts that actually apply to what we're working on. I haven't actually dug into it as a super fan. I've been really using it more as a work document. So it's like some people are wanting to talk about things, and it's like, I don't know how the new thing is going to work because I didn't read that part. I don't think I've cracked the bestiary in it at all. I know I haven't looked into most of the second half of the book. It's all been, the early stages, a lot of the combat stuff, a lot of the edges and hindrances stuff, the stuff that revolves mostly on character creation, because that's the stuff that impacts what a licensee is going to be doing more.
Right.
But
I don't think we're alone. I don't think we're alone in that camp of licensees and aces who are just heads down to okay, what rules affected the change of our setting. I don't think we're alone in that.
And I love the fact that so many aces are on board and releasing jump starts for it, so that all the fans are going to have, I want to say the list is up over 25 or 30 different jump starts that are coming out within the first month or month and a half, 2 months, something like that, after it releases. Just about the major meat of the settings that are out there are going to be available. And then there's even a few that have announced, I know we announced a setting that isn't publicly available yet is going to be available as part of the SWADE release. So
right.
I think that's really interesting because it's going to give people a ton of options of what to play.
Oh, I think it's imagine getting a non-genre specific, so it's a universal role-playing game system that works with all the additional setting specific things that are already out there from PEG and the licensees. And then on top of that, just for backing the new rule edition, you get 20 examples of mini campaigns or adventures to run across genres with the new rules. That's amazing. It's amazing as a Kickstarter offering if you really drop and think about it. It's like, oh no, we're not just going to give you this book. We're going to give you 25 or 30 mini settings across all different kinds of genres to play in and experiment with.
All of them with at least one adventure.
Yeah,
that's one of the requirements that they put forward to the aces, that Shane has publicly said. Every single jumpstart is playable. You're not receiving some advertising pamphlet that just tells you that, such and such company's going to release another Savage World setting. No, you're receiving something that's actually playable with the new rules. And that is just amazingly cool.
Yeah, it's like getting a test drive. It's like getting a free test drive for 20 different new settings coming out. I mean,
you're not going to, the problem that players are going to have is picking what to play, not finding something to play.
And speaking of which, we are named in there in the jump starts. Do we want to talk about it, guys?
Sure. I am not willing to give out dates, but I will say that a certain Savage Daddy has a product coming out between now and the end of the year that has been massively wanted for a bit, and then has another product coming out next year that is probably the most spoken about thing on this podcast, short of Savage Rose itself.
And I'm just going to leave this. If you're a fan of the podcast, we only need to say 2 words about it. John Stamos. Just reference anything we talked about, but John Stamos, you'll know what we're talking about. I don't want to talk about the name of it. I want people to sort of dig through the YouTube archive.
I really feel like we should get him on the podcast and explain to him why he is the scariest thing out there.
So,
All
a
right.
quick question here from John Bott right at the tail end of chat. He's asking, have the chase rules improved? There's 3 different versions that they've released through Sleepy Hollow. Take a look at them and see for yourself whether or not you think they've improved. The way I look at it is this: even if you don't like one or the other version that they've put out through that Sleepy Hollow bonus, you can take all of those and the old rules and the ones that existed back in Explorer and make an amalgam to create something that works for you.
Yeah, at your table. And I wouldn't say whether it's really not really a value judgment or whether or not they're better. They're different.
Oh, they absolutely, mechanically, each one is definitely unique.
Yeah. All right. Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and end the show. So until next time, this is Jared Savage, Daddy Gunning for Dustin and Dave, saying keep rolling and stay savage.